Okay, welcome to Lesson 5, his ISKCON branch. After a lifetime in preparation, our Founder-Acharya's mission appears on the world scene as ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Before we look at how Srila Prabhupada manifested ISKCON in phases, let's look at and listen to his mood and his mission as he himself expressed it upon arriving in America. So there on your screen is a collage put together by Dr. Flavio from Brazil. And there is Srila Prabhupada in the foreground, the Jaladuta in the background, and some Americana also behind the Jaladuta. There's Lady Liberty, Statue of Liberty. You have the outline of the map of America. If you recall, at the end of the last lesson, Prabhupada was crossing the Atlantic, and we heard Jamini's beautiful song to the Atlantic, begging the Atlantic to let him come safely. So when Prabhupada arrived in Boston Harbor on the 18th of September, 1965, at 5:30 a.m., the ship docked at Commonwealth Pier. And straight away, Prabhupada wrote a poem, whose title you see on the screen, Markine Bhagavat Dharma. That's Bengali for Teaching Krishna Consciousness in America. That's Prabhupada's free English translation of that phrase. And what we're going to see now is an 11-minute video offered to Srila Prabhupada on his Vyasa Puja Day in 2009, years after Prabhupada left this world. The offering was composed by a young devotee from the UK who, though he never met Srila Prabhupada physically, the multimedia offering that he made to Prabhupada is powerful evidence of how we can all meet Prabhupada, our Founder-Acharya, spiritually by serving his mood and his mission. So the video is a kind of moving slideshow, if you will, where you will hear Prabhupada's poem sung by our God brother Jai Sachinandan Prabhu. And I just heard, excuse me, I just heard on another recording from Hari Shauri Prabhu, who presents his Living Bhagavat seminars, that Jai Sachinandan actually got to sing what you're going to hear to Srila Prabhupada live in Los Angeles during Prabhupada's last visit to LA. Unfortunately, it wasn't recorded. But you will hear Jai Sachinandan setting Prabhupada's poem to music, and he's singing it in Bengali, but what you will see on the screen is the translation of each stanza of Prabhupada's poem in English. And furthermore, you will see in succession moving slides giving highlights of Prabhupada's preaching Leela from the Jaladuta time all the way to his disappearance. So,
Krishna yatha mera prati Vara kripa kale Krishna yatha mera prati Ilagiya nilehta karave আছে কিছু কাজ তব এই অনুমানে আছে কিছু কাজ তব এই অনুমানে নহে কেন আনিবে এই উগ্রসানে নহে কেন আনিবে এই উগ্রসানে রজস্তম গুণেরা শোভাইয়া জন রজস্তম গুণেরা শোভাইয়া জন বাসুদেব তারুষি নহে সে প্রসনা বাসুদেব তারুষি নহে সে প্রসনা তবে যদি তব কৃপা হয়া হয় দুঃখী তবে যদি তব কৃপা হয়া দুঃখী সকল সম্ভব হয় তুমি কে দুঃখী সকল সম্ভব হয় তুমি সে দুঃখী কিভাবে বুঝালে তারা বুঝেছে রাজা কিভাবে বুঝালে তারা বুঝেছে রাজা এত কৃপা করা প্রভু করি নিজ ভাষা এত কৃপা করা প্রভু করি নিজ ভাষা তোমারা ইচ্ছায় সব হয় মায়াব তোমারা ইচ্ছায় সব হয় মায়াব তোমারা ইচ্ছায় না মায়ার পরাগ তোমারা ইচ্ছায় না মায়ার পরাগ ইচ্ছা হয় যদি আদে দয়ুদা তবে ইচ্ছা হয় যদি তাদের দয়ুদা বুঝিবে নিশ্চয় তবার কথা যে তোমার বুঝিবে নিশ্চয় তবে কথা যে তোমার আতবদের কথাকে সবাই অবদান আতবদের কথা সে সবাই অবদান ধীর হইয়া শুনে যদি গানে ধীর হইয়া শুনে যদি গানে বাবা রজস্তম হাতে তবে পাইবে নিশা রজস্তম হাতে তবে পাইবে নিশা হৃদয়ের বজ্র বুঝি করে বুঝাব কথা বড় যে চাহি কি করে বুঝাব কথা বড় যে চাহি ক্ষুদ্রায় আমি কি নাহি না কোন শক্তি নাহি ক্ষুদ্রায় আমি কি নাহি না কোন শক্তি নাহি প্রভু কথা বলিবারে প্রভু কথা বলিবারে যে তোমারি প্রভু গরবে ভারে যে তোমারি প্রভু গরবে ভারে अखिल जगत गुरु वचन से हमार अखिल जगत गुरु वचन से हमार अलंकृता करिबा गमता धामा अलंकृता करिबा गमता धामा কৃপা হলে মন কথা শুদ্ধ হবে কৃপা হলে মন কথা শুদ্ধ হবে শুনিয়া সুকাজে ঘুচিবে শুনিয়া সবার সুকাজে ঘুচিবে तो यदि प्रभु हमारे ना जादे ना जाना जा प्रभु ना जाते मोदे काशेर पूतली कथा ना जाते मोदे काशेर पूतली कथा ना जाते मोदे Dinai Vedanai Name Kudaro Dinai Vedanai Name Kudaro Bhakti Vedanta Name Vedanta Karo Bhakti Vedanta Name Vedanta Karo
Hare Krishna Prabhus. So there we see in Prabhupada's face so many things, but the overriding quality of our Founder-Acarya is compassion. He cared enough to come. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't be performing devotional service. So that that young devotee who put together this Vyasa Puja offering never met Srila Prabhupada physically, but has he ever met Prabhupada on the spiritual platform? So just as this young devotee has let Prabhupada's life, teachings, mood, and mission own him, so similarly we all have to do that. Whether we're initiated by Prabhupada directly, or grand disciple, or grand. This is what it means to be a Prabhupada Anuga, a Prabhupada follower. So now we're going to get out of this medium, and go back to the PowerPoint. And there's the slide. Okay. So, there you see a collage. Prabhupada in a couple of those images, the black and white images at Tompkins Square Park in New York City, October 1966. And in the little color image on the lower left, we see more recently 3 aspiring Vaishnavis hugging, quote, the tree. So these images, the black and white images, are very historic actually. These historic photos from the East Village Other, which was the leading counterculture publication of the day in New York, they mark the start of Prabhupada's outdoor preaching in America, 1966, October. Now, 10 years later, when Srila Prabhupada was visiting New York in 1976 to celebrate New York City's first Rath Yatra, Prabhupada compared ISKCON's appearance at 26 2nd Avenue to Lord Bohr's appearance from the nostril of Lord Brahma. At first, Lord Bohr appeared from Brahma's nostril, a very tiny form, quickly assumed a very cosmic form. The Prabhupada said, that's just like ISKCON. It appeared from this little, as we say, hole in the wall, 26 2nd Avenue, and it quickly covered the earth in a very short time. There's many reasons for that. The main reason is that Krishna wanted his movement spread all over the world. He didn't want it locked away in India anymore. And he sent, as we saw in the Sambandha portion of the seminar, his Senapati Bhakta, his mantra Upasaka, his worshipper of the holy name, his military field commander to do that. That's the main reason. It was a transcendental arrangement. But we're also going to look at, in this lesson, in this ISKCON branch, how what Srila Prabhupada manifested as ISKCON, there was a plan behind it, as we say nowadays, a strategic plan, which Prabhupada began creating as early as the 1940s. So Srila Prabhupada's plan, the plan that manifested ISKCON so rapidly, we'll see in the next slide now, had 7 purposes behind the plan. So there's another now famous shot taken between 26 2nd Avenue and Prabhupada's apartment. There's a little courtyard, and one day Prabhupada was in the courtyard, standing there between the birdhouse and the bird bath in his robes. Someone got off a good shot, and now it's one of the famous early vintage Prabhupada shots in those days. So in July 1966, well, even before then actually, in March 1966, before Srila Prabhupada even moved from the Bowery to the Lower East Side, Prabhupada was consulting an attorney about incorporating, quote, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. This is before he had even any serious listeners to speak of. Then on July 1st, finally, in a caravan between the Bowery and the Lower East Side, some of Prabhupada's first listeners carried all his worldly possessions, which wasn't much, in a walking caravan to 26 Second Avenue. So in July, after Prabhupada got his own place at 26 Second Avenue, he incorporated ISKCON on July 13th. And in the incorporation papers, he listed 7 purposes. So when you see these purposes scrolled on the screen, you will notice, directly or indirectly, an overriding purpose. Try to think in your mind what that overriding purpose might be as I scroll the purposes in. I'm not going to give you all the words in every purpose because they're quite extensive, but I'll give you enough words for each one to get the gist. Purpose 1, to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all peoples in the techniques of spiritual life. 2, to propagate a consciousness of Krishna as it is revealed in the Bhagavad Gita, and then said after that, and the Srimad Bhagavatam. 3, to bring the members of the society together with each other and nearer to Krishna. And I remember Prabhupada said after Krishna, he said, the prime entity. Number 4, to teach and encourage the Sankirtan movement, the congregational chanting of the holy name of God. And then Prabhupada, we quoted the whole mantra in the incorporation papers. 5, to erect for the members and for society at large a holy place of transcendental pastime. 6, to bring the members closer together for the purpose of teaching a simpler and more natural way of life. And finally, number 7, with a view towards achieving the aforementioned purposes, to publish and distribute periodicals, magazines, books, and other writings. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, he wasn't known as Prabhupada yet, but at least he'd gone, as we pointed out in Lesson 3, from obscurity to Swamiji. So he signed it with his sannyas name, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, 13th July, 1966, New York, New York. So if you had to put all those purposes inside one department, say at a university, the heading that sort of binds all of those together is education. This is definitely an educational movement. And that's really what it's all about. Now, to realize his mission's purposes, Srila Prabhupada, he had worked for many years in India to craft a 4-phase plan. So what we're going to see for this lesson is the plan that Prabhupada gradually formulated, starting with the 1940s, developed in the 50s, and then in the 1960s, you see how he applied it as in ISKCON. Okay. First of all, in 1965, after Prabhupada came, as most of you know, he stayed, first of all, with the Agarwals, Gopal and Sally Agarwal, in Butler, Pennsylvania. And Sally Agarwal did a very proactive thing after Prabhupada arrived. She went straight to the local newspaper because she knew that Butler, being a small town, was going to just, wonder who that strange-looking person is who's walking from the YMCA every day to the Agrawal's townhouse. They didn't have room enough for Prabhupada in their house, so they put him up at the Y. But then he would just come over and cook for them and share whatever Krishna consciousness he could. So Sally went right to the local paper, the Butler Eagle, and they did a story on Prabhupada. So there's Prabhupada in the offices of the Butler Eagle with some kind of oriental image in the background. And it's striking to me how Prabhupada, he looks at once humble, but also very determined, and he knows what he's about. He's, as we say now, a man with a plan. He knows what he's come to do. He didn't come to be a tourist in America. He didn't come to simply be interviewed by newspapers and TV stations. Of course, he used those, but he had something to give. And there he is, holding his Srimad Bhagavatam, those famously brick-colored books with their Indian English and their transcendental charm. And so what we're going to see for the rest of the lesson is the fruit of research done by His Holiness Bhakti Raghava Maharaj, who, if you know him, he's been involved for years with the great unfulfilled phase of Prabhupada's mission, which is, of course, the Varnashram phase. But it was the Maharaj who first identified Prabhupada's plan from digging into Prabhupada's pre-USA writings. So we're going to see that plan now. But what we're going to do is we're going to see evidence of the plan from the pre-USA writings, and then we're going to see how years later Prabhupada applied that plan to ISKCON in a very creative, dynamic way. Okay. So, phase one. Now, these names, I've given the names, but you'll see the evidence to justify the names in the plan. So I call phase one Holy Names and Holy Books. Pre-USA. Now, all through these pre-USA writings, you're going to see reference to Gandhi, because the event that triggered the formulation, the beginning of the formulation of Prabhupada's plan, is the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was assassinated in January 1948 by a Hindu extremist, and Gandhi, as we know, was also Prabhupada's boyhood hero. Prabhupada said, when I met my Guru Maharaj, I was a Gandhian. And like a good Gandhian, I challenged Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who will hear this Chaitanya's message, as we heard in the last lesson. We are a captive nation. First, we must become free, and then people will listen to us. And of course, Suresvara Thakur said, Krishna consciousness is too urgent to wait for a change in politics. Be that as it may, Prabhupada had a relationship with Mahatma Gandhi that endured his whole life, as we mentioned, I believe, last time, a kind of ambivalent relationship. He liked Gandhi, the simple liver. He had no use for Gandhi, the Gita commentator. In any event, after Gandhi was assassinated, Prabhupada began writing big men in government and business, taking the opportunity of Gandhi's assassination as a way to introduce Krishna consciousness throughout the world. So you'll see what that means. This first pre-USA writing is some 8 years after Gandhi was assassinated, but this is a reference to the first phase of his plan, which he published in Back to Godhead, you see, 20th May 1956, and the quote is, "Leaders and politicians may take lessons from the life of Mahatma Gandhi in respect of his daily evening prayer meetings and regular recitation of Bhagavad Gita. Reciting the Gita makes one able to get rid of the demoniac way of life and gradually rise up to the plane of pure devotional life of the gods." So Prabhupada is using the name of Mahatma Gandhi. Everyone loves Gandhi. All the Indians love Gandhi. The whole world loves Gandhi because of his nonviolent stand, his non-cooperation with the British imperialism. So Prabhupada is using Gandhi's unfortunate assassination as a vehicle to start preaching spiritual revolution. The world needs a spiritual revolution. Okay, so you see in this first excerpt here, is Prabhupada's reference to Gandhi's habit of reciting the Gita and singing Sri Ram Jai Ram, like that. He was famous for that, for having bhajan and Gita recitation. So Prabhupada is referring to that. He's using that. So holy names and holy books. How did that manifest years later? We'll see in this case, 20th May 56. How did it manifest in 1966 when Prabhupada started ISKCON? So his ISKCON application. So for holy names, first of all, Prabhupada just saturated his first listeners with the holy name. From temple kirtan and then to Harinam Sankirtan in the streets, stadiums, plazas, parks, and beaches of the world. At first, Prabhupada, he just inundated his listeners with Harinam Kirtan and speaking Bhagavad Gita. He was just trying to get them absorbed in Krishna through the holy names, the Hare Krishna mantra. That was his strategy. And then, of course, in the fall, when he went outside with the kirtan to the park, he shocked his followers. And now we're going to go out into the park and chant. And they were really timid to do that, but then they eventually liked it, as we see on the film. So holy name. And then holy books. Of course, there were no books when Prabhupada first came, except the books he brought, which was the Srimad Bhagavatam. But there was his Gita was not out yet. He was still translating it. He'd done it a couple of times. Once the manuscript was stolen, once a typewriter was stolen. So Prabhupada was working on the Gita and using the translation of an impersonalist, the first president of India, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, his Gita from the Gita Press. And then Prabhupada was giving the purport. So holy books, from temple classes to systematic courses, from BTG distribution to book distribution. This is how it evolved. But it all started from Prabhupada's plan. Vibrate transcendental sounds, chant Hare Krishna, and study the Shastra. Okay. Now, phase 2. So after introducing holy names and holy books, Srila Prabhupada was ready to introduce his plan's next phase. 2 is temples and deities. Again, these are our labels, but this is how we identify the phases that Prabhupada was talking about in his pre-USA writings. Again, let's look at some of those writings, and here's the reference. Okay. The mission, this is again from the same article in BTG. quote, "The mission of Gita Nagari must have its aim to rectify the anomalies that have entered into these centers of spiritual education and regenerate them to the sense of spiritual life through the exemplary life of devotees." Okay. Now this Gita, reference to Gita Nagari, this is the name Prabhupada first gave to his mission. Even before the League of Devotees, when Gandhi was assassinated, he was writing the leaders of India saying, look, don't just make a statue honoring Gandhi, pigeons with this past stool on it. I can show you how to make a whole community based on Gandhi's inspirational book, Bhagavad Gita, which would be a lasting and ongoing developing memorial to Mahatma Gandhi. So he called his plan, his mission at that point, Gita Nagari, the village where the Bhagavad Gita is sung and lived. We didn't know in the 1970s when Prabhupada renamed the Pennsylvania farm. It used to be called New Varshana, and then Prabhupada renamed it Gita Nagari. We didn't know at that point that Prabhupada already had used that in his pre-USA writing. So, Prabhupada is lamenting in this article that India's temples, originally designed as places of worship and purification and education, they've been neglected, and they're not actually being used for the purpose they've been designed. Gandhi also, he had something called a temple entry movement. Gandhi also saw the values of temples, but he wanted everyone to be able to enter to the temples indiscriminately. He didn't have a sense of what the temples were for, places of purification. In this article, Prabhupada wrote, "Unfortunately, the temples have become rendezvous of demoniac dance," which was startling to me. I mean, we're used to, churches and temples maybe in America being used for other than religious purposes, but back in the 50s, Prabhupada is saying that rendezvous of demoniac dance. I'd like to know exactly specifically what Prabhupada is referring to. It's hard to imagine people boogieing in Indian temples in the 1950s or 40s, but it was definitely not sacred dance. So, how did Prabhupada apply this phase 2? He applied it to ISKCON later on, his ISKCON application. Well, at the beginning, the temple buildings, they were storefronts. And then, as more people, devotees and money came forward, the movement began to buy churches. And then, in Europe, it even escalated up to castles, like that. And then we started to build our own temple. So, and then, let's see, and deities. Well, the first deities in ISKCON were paintings. The first painting, you may remember, if you've seen films of Prabhupada at 26 2nd Avenue, sitting up on the dais, behind him there's a circular painting of Radha and Krishna and Goloka. And that was done by a fellow named Harvey Cohen, who became the first Haridas. This is before Jadharani had even come. She came a month or two later. Haridas didn't stick, but Jadharani, she stuck, and she was an art student at CCNY, the City College of New York. And she had talent, although it wasn't so developed, but it did develop with practice. And Prabhupada told her to paint the Panchatattva. He gave her an image of the Panchatattva, which she did, and that became the first deity in 26 2nd Avenue, the painting of the Panchatattva. Later on, in in the second center Prabhupada opened in San Francisco, a little out of sequence, a little out of the norm, right away deities manifested there practically when Melanie, who became Malati, as we know, famously shoplifted those Indian-looking images from the import store. And she was so surprised when Swamiji offered us pranams and had her husband-to-be, Sam Spearster, became Shamsundar. He had Shamsundar carve larger deities based on those little figurines that Melanie had found at the import store. So right away, practically, they had carved deities. Shamsundar knew how to carve. He was very capable. So, from deity painting, and then when Prabhupada brought his Western disciples back to India, and then the movement started to spread around the world, then Prabhupada started sending deities from India to various locations at his new ISKCON centers, especially from Jaipur. So we began importing the deities from India, and then eventually, like at the Faith Studios in Los Angeles and at some studios in New Vrindavan, for example, devotees started making their own deities. So, phase 2, temples and deities. Prabhupada's idea was that the temples are places of purification and education, so he wanted to, as he said, regenerate them. He wanted to restore them to their original purpose. Now, phase 3. Now, the next phase, phase 3, it's a good example of how Prabhupada applied the phases of his plan differently in different parts of the world. We would write about this later, how the way you introduce and develop Krishna consciousness, it varies according to, as His Divine Grace put it, time, country, and candidate. On the top right image there, you see a Western initiation, 1973, Los Angeles. You see a young Vivekananda, Siddhama, Tirtha, Ramaswara, Sakurari, Karanda, and looking over Mataji, way back, Narayan. Oh, actually, that's Rita. Anyway, Prabhupada initiating a Western young lady. Now, initiation came right away in America, practically. The first initiation was Vyasa Puja, 1966, in 25th Second Avenue. But in his strategic plan that he was formulating in the 40s and 50s, that was phase 3. First of all, you saturate people with holy names and holy books. Then you introduce the temple, full-blown temple, and deities. Then it's initiation, and then Prabhupada said initiation and congregation. Let's look at how he referred to that in his Kriya, we'll say right in here. Quote, the third item is to take up the Harijan movement. This is a direct reference to Gandhi. This is what Gandhi said. Gandhi had a temple entry movement for all the masses and a Harijan movement. And then Prabhupada says this movement is a spiritual initiation movement, and this should be organized in such a manner that people all over the world may take interest in it. So the Harijan movement, if you're familiar with Gandhi, was Harijan, Hari, God, Jan, people. Gandhi was objecting, of course, to the corrupt caste system, which is a perversion of Varnashram, where people were claiming privilege and status by birth and monopolizing the temples and saying that no low-class people could come in the temples. And so Gandhi said, well, why is that? Everybody's a person of God, a child of God. Everyone should be allowed in the temple. Now, Prabhupada agreed in principle with that, Everybody's a child of God, a person of God, a Harijan. But then Prabhupada took it to the scriptural level, to a higher level, a deeper level, that if people want to become fit to once again associate with God and the deity, they have to undergo a process. And that's called Diksha Vidhan, process of initiation. And there's a whole sadhana regimen that goes with that Diksha Vidhan. So don't just stamp them Harijan, but bring them into the temple, engage them in Krishna service, and take them through a process of initiation. And then around the temple will inevitably develop a healthy, spiritually focused congregation. Okay, now how did Prabhupada introduce initiation and congregation? Well, it was different. As I said, first of all, in the West, there was initiation. And there was also Harinam Sankirtan right away. Now in India, you see the second bullet point there. In India, life membership came on early. Because what happened was, the devotees were chanting Hare Krishna, those dancing white elephants in 1970-71. Prabhupada called us dancing white elephants. And they were well received in places like Surat, but in big cities like Bombay and Delhi and Calcutta, there was some suspicion for different reasons. One was that it was still the Cold War, very intense Cold War. And India was a neutral country. And they're close, relatively close geographically to Russia. And traditionally, India and Russia, there was a lot of mutual interest. Russia especially, is fascinated by Indian philosophy and culture. So when these American disciples came over with Srila Prabhupada, there was a suspicion that perhaps they were just hippies. One paper called them sporadic faddists. This won't last. Maybe they're high on drugs and they're infatuated with chanting Hare Krishna, but it's not the real thing. There was even a movie that came out called Dum Maro Dum, which in Hindi means puff after puff. Dum Maro Dum, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. Puff after puff, I chant Hare Krishna and I smoke dope. So there was suspicion either they were hippies or they were CIA. So Prabhupada, seeing this skepticism in the media, he temporarily suspended Harinam in the streets in those big cities, and he said, now we're going to start life membership, because it's not the West, and there is a sentiment for Vaishnavism in India, and even big men in government and business. If you approach them in the right way, Prabhupada said, they will be very glad to subscribe to our movement. So Prabhupada told the devotees how to do it. And Prabhupada himself, of course, had a good name in India. He was a respected scholar and saintly person. And now he was having some impact all over the world. They were suspicious of us, but his credentials were impeccable. So Prabhupada gave them the components of a life membership package. And sure enough, the devotees approached big men in government and business, and they did agree to pay 1,111 rupees, and get benefits of being life members. And that worked very much to our advantage. Especially I'm thinking of the Bombay case, where the infamous Mr. Nair tried to cheat us out of the land and our money, and with the help of some very highly placed friends of the movement who had become life members, the tide turned against Mr. Nair and even the bribed police and the suspicious press. So that was a very strategic move by Srila Prabhupada to switch the phases there and start congregation life membership right away. And later, congregational ministry, Namahanta programs. Now contrast that with how congregations, for example, started in the West. Of course, in the West, where there's no supportive culture, it's a desert of materialism. Prabhupada's first communities were like little urban communes, or maybe bigger urban communes like in LA, where you were either in or you were out. There was no way to be Krishna conscious outside these temples in those early days. It was rather like Prabhupada was, just like when you plant a tree, you have to fence it. You have to build a fence around it and support it. So there was no question of congregation, practically, because everybody was just inside the temples, and it was pretty much just young people, with some exceptions, but that's basically how it went. It wasn't really until Prabhupada left this world and devotees started getting a little older that, for example, in temples in America, we began to discover our congregation practically despite ourselves, practically by accident. Devotees would, one by one, start leaving the temples, doing the unthinkable, going out, getting jobs so they could support a family, getting married. And then they'd come back to the temples on the weekend. And the devotees who were still in the temples didn't quite know what to make of it, because you couldn't preach to these people, because they already knew the score in a sense. They knew Krishna was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they were living outside, quote unquote, and there was really no Krishna consciousness as far as the temple devotees knew outside of the temples in our immature days. But those devotees kept coming back, for the Sunday feasts and for the festivals. So initially they were ignored or even sometimes shunned, the devotees who came back with their families. But then after a while it began to dawn on the temple devotees that, well, I guess these are our people. They're not going away. So practically despite ourselves, in many cases, in many temple communities, we began to discover our congregation from the very people who used to live inside the temple. So this phase especially, initiation and congregation, is a great example of how the phases didn't happen the same way, according to, as Prabhupada said, time, country, candidate. Okay, now, because the fourth and final phase of Prabhupada's plan embraces really the whole world, we've been slow to embrace it. In fact, we're still qualifying ourselves to execute the fulfillment of Prabhupada's preaching vision. And of course, I'm referring to phase 4, Varnashram. Let's take a look at some of Prabhupada's pre-USA writings where he mentions this phase of the plan. Remember the first phase, holy names, holy books, then temples and deities, then initiation and congregation. Now, the fourth phase, Prabhupada's writing to the Deputy Prime Minister of India, right under Nehru, was this Dr. Sardar Patel. And he exchanged several letters with Dr. Patel. And he says, in this excerpt, quote, "The fourth item is to organize the much-discussed caste system." And when Prabhupada says much discussed, it's a code word for controversial. Now, Prabhupada's going to unflinchingly pursue that as a solution of natural division of the human beings all over the world. I mean, that phrase, caste system, even by then had become practically a dirty words, because it was naturally equated with exploitation and false claims of privilege just by birth. Prabhupada continues, Nationalistic division of human races is artificial, but scientific division of the caste system by qualities and work, as envisaged in the Bhagavad Gita, is natural. So Prabhupada's complete vision for, as he put it, the Gita Nagari, Prabhupada did spell out to Dr. Patel. And but as Prabhupada told us later, I was really crying alone in the wilderness. No one was interested. No one was interested in spiritual revolution. Everyone was very interested in copying the West and becoming a big industrial power, as is the case today. So here's another evidence of Prabhupada's pre-ISKCON plan from his pre-USA writings. This is a quote from Prabhupada's Gita Nagari essay, which it says circa 1948, because it couldn't have been long after Gandhi was assassinated in January of that year that Prabhupada wrote this. Quote, when the Gita Nagari will attempt to harmonize such sweet relations between man and God, man and the world and God, at such an auspicious time only, the United Nations' effort to establish peace in the world will be successful. For the dream of a caste-less society, by birth, all over the world will be realized in practice. Okay. So, prior to writing Dr. Patel in 49, Prabhupada actually did write this Gita Nagari essay in the wake of Gandhi's assassination. And this Gita Nagari is a pastoral village where the Gita would be sung and lived. So the whole essay, available on the database, it represents Prabhupada's first attempt to name and describe the mission that he had inherited from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And this formulation, predating even the League of Devotees, Gita Nagari is the first hint, the first gleam, the first glint of what would eventually manifest years later as ISKCON. And now we're going to see what, if any, application we've had on this consummate and fourth phase, the ISKCON application. Okay, this is a quote from TKG's diary. I have only done 50% of what I want to do. The farms have to be done. If they are established, Varnashram will be established. This is from Tamal Krishna Maharaj's 10th of August, 77 diary entry. And then I say in green there, to this day, ISKCON's Varnashram application has barely begun. Here's a corroborating reference to that 50%. The context is Ramananda Swami at the time is asking Prabhupada toward the end if he had any regrets, anything he regretted about the way things were going in his ISKCON. And Prabhupada says, no regrets. And then he stops and he says, actually I have one lamentation. And then Ramananda asks, because you have not finished translating the Srimad Bhagavatam? And Prabhupada replies, know that I have not established Varnashram. He's written about it, spoken about it, he presents it as the ideal culture for going from the material world to the spiritual world. But he actually hasn't had time to sit down, so to speak. And this is what the phrase Prabhupada used when he was on his way to Gita Nagari in 77 in September and never made it because his health just got too bad. But he said, I want to sit down at that Pennsylvania farm and show you how to live in Varnashram. And there is Prabhupada in the image. I believe it's the Mississippi Farm, 1975. I have to verify that. So that's the great unfulfilled phase of the mission, which he wrote about as early as the 1940s and 50s. And to this day, we haven't really done much with that. And there is the next lesson. And the transition to next week's lesson is, with a better understanding of the conception and unfolding of our Founder-Acharya's ISKCON mission, we are now ready to take a closer look at its unfulfilled phase, Varnashram, why we have been so reluctant to embrace it, and what we must do to approach it. So I call it Prabhupada's Varnashram Challenge. 40 years ago, this year, it's a standing challenge. We've barely approached the challenge. So before we do question and answer, I'd just like to remind you of what we looked at in the lesson. So when you ask your questions and make your comments, you can relate them specifically to these points. So by the end of the lesson, students will be able to describe Srila Prabhupada's mood and mission as expressed in the multimedia Vyasa Puja offering that we viewed, as well as what that young follower's offering shows us about how to know and be close to Srila Prabhupada. Students will be able to identify ISKCON's 7 purposes, as well as its overriding purpose, and we should be able to identify the 4 phases of our Founder-Acharya's plan to spread Krishna consciousness worldwide. Okay, Ramananda, I'm just going to take the headphones off and relieve my ears, but I'll keep the mic close to me.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions or comments for Suresvara Prabhu?
Comment, I'm stunned as always. It's just, it takes my breath away, Prabhuji. It's such essential knowledge and perspective that you're giving us in ISKCON that I really encourage you to, really share this as much as possible everywhere you go. You've really become empowered. This is wonderful stuff. I don't have a question. Thank you.
Okay, let me just say one thing. We were talking yesterday, and Narahari has a vision of how we can get the seminar all around the world a little better. I'm not so good at that. So Nara, please meditate on that, and I hope we can do that together.
I think with Ramananda, with his technical expertise, I think we should be able to do it. I think it's essential just to share with everyone what we're talking about. These sessions are being recorded. This is the latest of Suresvara Prabhu's presentation as it's been evolving over the years. And here at on our Sangha, esangha.org, we had the honor of hearing the very first attempt at presenting this knowledge. And it's kind of interesting that the first one was so rough that we immediately deleted it. And we all agreed it was too rough. And I honestly thought when I heard that first one that I got to talk to Suresh Prabhu. This just isn't going to make it. And then it just got, the next one just got so, they just kept getting better and better and better and sweeter. And over the, Suresh Prabhu's just gotten more and more empowered as he has been encouraged and by Vaishnavas all over the world who have also been sharing their realizations with him. So we're now in the process of recording all of the sessions which are going to be hosted on our isanga.org. And the thought was coming to our mind, Suresvara Prabhu, Ramananda Prabhu, and myself yesterday, when we were just discussing how this was being recorded, that we want to, and we're open to any suggestions that anyone has of how we can get out on in the information superhighway of ISKCON and ISKCON's congregation all over, that anyone who wants to hear, and everyone should hear, this enlightening teachings that Suresh Prabhu is giving us, that we want to get it advertised everywhere, to all the congregations, to all the temples, to all the websites, the good, the bad, and the ugly, anyone who has any interest in hearing this seminar, because it'll be there. You don't have to be there at a certain time on a certain day, but all 10 sessions will be there, and at one's leisure, they can listen. So we were just brainstorming how to get this knowledge out to our whole society and all of our congregation, and we're really open to any ideas anyone has to help us figure out how to get this out of here, get this connected, because it's really, really essential. Suresvara Prabhu has become a master and really empowered in putting Prabhupada in the proper position that he needs to be in our society in order for it to be successful. But anyway, that's what we're talking about.
Thank you for the supportive words, Narahari. And rather than brainstorm now about that, let's see if we can
All right.
Talk about the lesson.
Absolutely. I agree.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
I love the analogy. Did you say it before about, maybe it just hit me this time, it didn't hit me before, about you were talking about a 26-second avenue, and you were drawing an analogy of Lord Bohr. And if Prabhupada said that, did you say that before in the seminar? That just as Lord Bohr came out of the nostril of Lord Brahma and then, covered the whole world, how this movement came out of 26-second avenue and encompassed the world.
Only Prabhupada could have said that. Yeah, that was Prabhupada's analogy, and
wow, that's amazing.
I don't necessarily repeat that every time, just because there's so much material. I just repeat different things depending on the audience, So that's Prabhupada's vintage analogy there.
Wow, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Suresvara, I had one comment, I guess, and that was one of the things that Srila Prabhupada established was life membership, one of his phases. Don't you think that maybe life membership is starting to be a thing of the past? I know in India there still is life membership, but in many places, temples that I'm aware of, they don't honor life membership as far as accommodations. So it's difficult. It's not really anywhere other than in India, or am I wrong? ISKCON's a many-splendored society, and perhaps you're right. Perhaps with the onset of the congregational ministry, that superseded, the old life membership program, because congregational ministry is really all-embracing. Namhata, Bhakti Vriksha, and it's true what you say too, that depending on where you go in ISKCON, there's more or less accommodation. So I'd have to ask the congregational ministry that, people like Komteya or Jayapataka Maharaj, if life membership is now a thing of the past. Because it's all about the congregation. I'm not sure. I can't answer that definitively.
The reason I'm bringing it up is because of, you know, I don't want to put it like a dark cloud, but it's one of the main points that you're bringing up, and historically it's a fact. Srila Prabhupada established it, and it went strong for several years. But as far as right now, it really seems like it's on the wane. It's actually disappointing when people in India, coming from India, and they try and, you know, ask for accommodations, and almost, you know, many temples just say, no, we don't do that.
Yeah, I don't know if it still exists per se, life membership, or it's still an aspect of the congregational ministry. Congregational ministry is what you hear. That's what's promoted. That's what's taught. So I just don't know if that phrase is extinct or if it's still around. You know, I don't know. I'd have to ask them.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Please accept my humble obeisances, Prabhu. They do have life membership program in Los Angeles that goes on now. So I know the devotee that runs that. Her name is Narayani, Devi Das, the Indian devotee. So anyway, they do have that there, but unfortunately what we see is that most of them, the life members that come, they want a free place to stay for 3 days, and they're not really interested in Krishna consciousness, and they just want to go to, or on vacation, and they just want to go to Disneyland and, you know, things like that. So it's more like, you know, a lot of them don't even go to the temple, but they do have that ongoing in LA at least. They have, you know, more apartments, more facilities.
So in some cases, it's become like a traveler's convenience. It's not so much what was originally intended.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's unfortunate. It's like that's the motive of the Indian families that take up to, you know, that get the life membership. A lot of them are thinking that, oh, you know, free places to stay where we can go and tour and stuff. You know, I guess there's some that attend the temples, but, you know, I was staying with Narayani, and yeah, it was kind of a shame, you know. So then they start charging when they do that, you know, like a per nightly type of thing. Because so
right.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, what to speak of life members, that we went through that in America, you know, the whole green card thing, with importing devotees to save the seva, but then, of course, it becomes just a gateway to the material world.
Yeah.
For ambitious people from the East. Yeah, you don't even have to go to the life members. You can just go right inside the temples. As far as I know, that's a thing. That's not allowed anymore. We don't even grant religious worker visas anymore because of the abuse. Anyway, anything more in the lesson? It's pretty straightforward, huh? But thanks so much to Bhakti Raghava Maharaj for pointing out those 4 phases. By the way, Prabhupada didn't use the word phase in his writings. He used 2 words. He used the word movement. There's 4 movements. And he used the word waves, a la Rupa Goswami, like the waves in the ocean of devotion. But to make it more plain for the, you know, for our Western or modern ear, what Prabhupada meant was phases. But he had these phrases, movements and waves, 4-fold movements, 4-fold waves, like that. And I ended up in the 4th stage because that nicely gives us a chance to take a look at what in some quarters is even a forgotten phase. And there he is. There it is on the screen, the Varnashram Challenge. So that will be next week, same time, same place. Ramananda, if there's no other questions or comments, I guess we'll just sign off, huh?
All right. Thank you, Prabhu.
And we are going to record, just a reminder, Thursday, Friday. That'll be the 10th and the 11th of this coming week. We're going to re-record lessons 1 and 2, correct?
I'll be ready for you.
Suresh, I really enjoyed when you were describing, again, maybe I'd never missed it before, didn't hear it, but it was enlivening. You were talking about the progression of how we started out with 26 Second Avenue. I forgot exactly how you said it. Then we got like, bigger fronts, and then we got buildings, and then we got temples, and then we got castles, and then we started building temples. That progression from 26 Second Avenue, not only just building temples, but now we're building places like Mayapur that will, attract the entire world. I like that progression that you did from 26th Avenue all the way up, including, churches and then temples and then castles and building our own temples, and now projects like Mayapur and Vrindavan.
And you'll see that the key to, you could have said something else after that. You could have said, and then all those castles and palaces and temples, and then they became ghost towns. And then they emptied. But the key to reviving, temples and palaces and castles and schlosses and this and that is this phase you're looking at right on the screen. And we haven't, the temples are key portals in a whole constellation of initiatives that Prabhupada had in mind of how to inundate the world with Krishna consciousness. And that's the next lesson, the Varnashram challenge. We haven't done that, and therefore we've experienced what we've experienced, especially in America, of the great, diaspora, the great dispersion of devotees from temples and staying away very often. So we're going to take a look at how Varnashram is the key to actually revitalizing the whole movement. And I'm glad you mentioned Mayapur, because it says in Navadvipdam Mahatmya, which is a very visionary work that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote in the 1890s, which is basically Lord Nityananda giving Jiva Goswami a tour of Navadvip. And in that Navadvipdam Mahatmya, that's where the Adbhuta Mandir, the wonder of the world, the Adbhuta, the wonderful temple will arise. And when that temple is completed, and that won't happen unless and until the whole ISKCON world gets behind it. It's just too vast. It's too gigantic. It's too much for Ambarish or any group of devotees. It's the whole ISKCON world. It's a major test of cooperation. When that happens, the temple will manifest, and then Lord Nityananda says, this is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Lord Nityananda says, in Navadvipdam Mahatmya, then from that temple, Krishna consciousness will really start to flood the whole world big time. It's going to really put us on the map, and it rivals the Vatican. It rivals, wonders of the world. It's going to have it's too much when you're there, when you see it going up. So that is a big, big initiative of Prabhupada, and that's actually the last, this in the Varnashram, or the two pieces of the puzzle, that when they're there vigorously and in a world-class way, that's when people will really take notice that we're showing people a better way to live, and we're showing people a whole cosmology that's an alternative to scientific materialism. So it's going to be very powerful.
Well, Hare Krishna, Prabhu, this is Mahesh here. I kind of have to disagree with you about that. I think that I don't think this is, our movement is a mystical movement. Srila Prabhupada was a mystical person. It's not about big, big, big temples. The biggest temple there is in your heart. That's where Krishna really resides. What is needed now is really devotees that want to take care of other devotees. This is really, your point is very important here. And the fact is that we have not established Varnashram Dharma, although there may be pockets of locations around the world that they're taking this seriously. But we really need to establish the small communities, and we really need devotees that take care of other devotees. I think that's my humble opinion about this.
You couldn't be more correct, Mahesh, and it's not different than what I said. It's simply the inner message of what I was saying. And I did mention that this temple won't be completed unless and until everybody gets behind it. Now, get behind it doesn't mean just throw money at it. It means, as you're suggesting, unless and until we really find that cooperation based on Vaishnava relationships and our foundational identity and relationship being with the Founder-Acharya. Prabhupada is the one that makes it all go. And Prabhupada, in his Vapu Leela, when he started talking about the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium in 1972, when he broke ground for the Mayapur project, he made it clear from the very beginning, this is what has to arise. And that won't arise, as you say, Mahesh, unless and until we advance more in Krishna consciousness, in Vaishnava relationships, in Vaishnava community. Therefore, when people go to Mayapur, there's one course that I tell devotees when they finally arrive in Mayapur. Before you take your Bhakti Shastra, before you take your Bhakti Vaibhav, the Shastra courses, you must take this seminar that one devotee made. His name now is Bhakti Brihat Bhagavat Maharaj. His name used to be Brihat Mridanga Prabhu. He's an Indian, South African devotee by ancestry. And he has been in ISKCON since the 1980s. And he was very disappointed when one guru left. And then second time he was betrayed. And he was very bitter. And finally, he realized that if I'm going to help Prabhupada's movement, instead of just being bitter about being betrayed by leaders who left, I'm going to do something to try to help Prabhupada's movement. So he made this wonderful seminar, and it's been about 25 years in the making now. I've taken it twice. It's called Bhakti Sadachara. Bhakti Sadachara means Vaishnava behavior, but it's more than that. This seminar encompasses community, Vaishnava relationships, Vaishnava etiquette, Vaishnava behavior. This is the temple of the heart, the temple of the mind that you're talking about. This is the kind of maturity that we're going to need to manifest this temple of the Vedic Planetarium. You couldn't be more right, Mahesh Prabhu. And when we're in Mayapur and looking at this wonder of the world go up, we know that Lord Chaitanya will not let this building get built unless and until we get it together internally. And that's the real challenge. That's more of a challenge than the physical structure. Why is the money slower right now? It could be going up faster because we need to do more internal work. And you couldn't be more correct. I'm sorry if it came out kind of external and superficial, because it is Prabhupada. It was a component and a kind of crowning component in Prabhupada's master plan to flood the world with Krishna consciousness. But really, it's only a manifestation of what has to go on in the inside. Thank you for that potent reminder.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, yes. So, Ramananda, I guess I'll see you later in the week. And Narahari Prabhu, we're going to get together on Skype in a little bit. But I guess you'll have to do some editing on this, Ramananda, because we've been talking about different things, but I guess the sound quality was pretty decent though, huh?
Yeah, not too bad.
Okay.
Really good from my end.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Suresh Prabhu.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
Suresh. Thank you, everyone.
Haribo.
Jai Shri
Hare
Prabhupada.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Very well.